You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Welcome back to Music Tectonics, where we go beneath the surface of music and tech. I'm your host, Dimitri Vitsa. I'm also the CEO and founder of Rock, Paper, Scissors, a PR firm that specializes in music and technology. And as you know, we are digging into all aspects of music tech here on the podcast and at the conference. And today I've got a great guest. I'm excited. Coming in from Melbourne, Australia is John McCubbery. He's the Vice President of International Sales and Marketing at KORG USA. Welcome to the podcast, John. How are you?
I'm great, and can I just correct you? I'm actually Vice President of KORG International, not just KORG USA. So
okay.
My office is actually in Tokyo in non-COVID times. So
right, and you're in Melbourne, but you're normally in Tokyo.
I'm normally on a plane because I go to Tokyo. I spend about 6 or 7 months a year away from home. I go to Tokyo to the office every month for a week or two, then to KORG USA, KORG UK, KORG Europe, KORG other places, and visiting distributors, dealers, studios, musicians, the whole thing.
This must be a strange year to be sitting still on the ground for so long.
Oh my God! Yes, my dog actually no longer barks when I walk through the house. It's a great thing. No, well, our kids are growing up, so they're all college and everything. But this is the first time the most time I've spent at home in about 30 years.
Yes, I feel the same way, although I'm not normally on a plane like you. Maybe once or twice a month I'm going to a music conference or going to meet clients or something like that. But man, it's got to be so different from you. Well, this is so great. I appreciate you making the time today, John. I read a little bit about KORG's origin story online. And even though I've bought and played KORG instruments, I didn't realize the origin story. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the first couple of instruments that KORG founders Tsutomo Katoh and Tadashi...
Tsutomo Katoh. You just threw me then. Mr. Katoh-san has always been the way I refer to him. Katoh-san was running a nightclub and he had a band performing at the nightclub. And the organist complained that it was difficult getting drummers to turn up, which hasn't, of course, that's never happened since. And so he said, if I had enough capital, I could build a drum machine to basically play along with. And Katoh-san said, I can fund that. And together they developed a thing called the Donkomatic. And the Donkomatic was the first, rhythm machine pretty much in the music world. And on the basis of that, Katoh-san said, what other ideas do you have? And they started developing variations on the rhythm machine and then eventually got in more engineers and decided to branch into the growing field of electronic music. And Katoh-san was different from what a lot of people imagine a Japanese entrepreneur businessman to be. He was really trying to do things that were different. Everything's always been about, we don't copy. We're not interested in copying. We can see an idea and then say, wait a minute, we know where you think you are going. Why don't we try and do that? Or we do completely new things. And so throughout the late 60s and early 70s, we developed one of the very first synthesizers, and it doesn't matter about all the names and model numbers now, but Mieda-san, who's one of the great Yoda geniuses of all time, was responsible for analog filters for other companies' synthesizers, I won't name them, as well as developing the MS-20, which was an extraordinarily innovative synth in 1978. And from then on, Katoh-san was thinking, well, we can see where electronic music is going. We can see where popular music's going. How can we jump ahead and give musicians things to aspire to and things that are different? And one of the great stories that Mieda says is that when we decided to do a really faithful recreation of a Hammond organ, but as a very small, digital, easy to carry around keyboard, a lot of the music stores around the world said, no one wants that. Everyone wants synthesizers. And yet, when it came to market, it proved to be phenomenally successful. In the late 80s, Kato-san was on a roll, and we developed a keyboard called the M1, which is one of the first. It was the first real workstation, the first PCM-based synth, which means it was using samples, and it was the first time someone had a realistic acoustic piano sound in the synthesizer. Still, I think one of the biggest selling synthesizers of all time, and it led to a whole lot of other workstation innovations. And the reason that I'm kind of laboring this theme of going in a different way is because Steve Jobs famously said, we don't do market research because people don't know what they want until you show it to them, you know. And when I can tell you, when Kato-san saw that, he said, exactly, that's exactly right. And so when we had music stores around the world telling us, don't build workstations, everything's going to software in the late 90s, early 2000s, we did the exact opposite and doubled down on workstations. And of course, it turns out a huge number of musicians were performing live, still wanted them. They weren't going to take laptops on stage. And so, you know, for about 2 years, we had the market almost entirely to ourselves. And it's not because we were innovative, it's just because we were trying to think in advance of where people were thinking. In 2015, as part of our 50th at that time anniversary, we put out a reissue of the MS-20 Mini. And I can tell you, having spoken to the biggest dealers in the world, everyone said, this is a gigantic mistake. No one wants this. It's monophonic. It's got no programs. It's got no effects. It was only mildly successful in the 1970s. For God's sake, can't you instead give us, you know, a range of products that were just Me Too copies? Well, on the second day of the NAMM show, when that thing was released, we had dealers bombarding the stand saying, I've sold my entire annual allocation. You've got to increase production, which of course we'd already factored in because we knew that one of the problems with experts in the business is they're experts on today. They're not necessarily thinking about the future. That seems like a roundabout answer to your question, and I apologize if it seems like I didn't get into nitty-gritty. But what I was trying to say is that the philosophy is think different. And so we pretty much pioneered the analog revolution of the 2010s, the last 10 years. And we've sold the largest number of analog synths of any company. In fact, probably of all the other companies combined, we've outsold them in the last 7 or 8 years. And I'm not saying that in terms of $2,000 and $3,000 and $4,000 products, sometimes as low as $150. But we tried to figure out where people were really making music, as against the people who love to go to NAMM shows with terribly out of date hairstyles because they can't let go of the past. And they keep saying things used to be so great back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 60s, you know, pick the decade.
Right.
And we just don't want to think that way. We're thinking, no, you know, why aren't we thinking about where people are going? How can we meet them? How can we do things that are different? One of the innovative products we did in the 1990s was a thing called the Chaos Pad, which was an effects unit, you know, reverb, delay, chorus, flange, that was entirely driven by putting your finger on a touchpad. And I remember meeting music store owners saying, who in the world wants to use something with a touchpad? Well, that was, you know, 15 years before the iPhone, you know, and the touchscreen world that we're now in. And that just came from listening to a young engineer who came in one day saying, you know, I've been messing around with an idea at home. And Kato has always been big into, okay, show us what you've been doing at home. So when we had software companies coming to us 15, 18 years ago saying, oh, look, we want to license, you know, this one of your famous synthesizers from the past, it doesn't matter about the model, and, you know, we'll give you a royalty and we're just going to do a software emulation of it. Kato said, I don't think so. And all these young guys basically in the lift, the classic coming up the lift said, you know, I've been working on software at home. Fantastic. Show us what you've done. And we came up with component modeling technology, a much deeper emulation, way of doing software that led to much more realistic versions of our instruments, we retained ownership. And we were years ahead of the other hardware manufacturers who said, this software thing's just a fad, it'll pass. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying once you get used to this mindset that don't get driven by the way people see the world today, we've got to be thinking in the future. We're trying to help musicians, creators, producers of the future, not just today. Then it actually liberates you into doing things that everyone says won't work until they do.
Incredible. I'm so, I asked you one question and I feel like I've just dived into this genetic essence of Korg, which it's crazy. Like I've been following Korg. Like I said, I've played some Korg instruments, and I always get this sense that there's this innovation mindset that's present there. And to hear that that's exactly how it started in the early 60s and continues with these types of stories of innovation that take place just by somebody in leadership listening to a younger engineer talking about what they're tweaking at home, and then to go against the current. I mean, this whole thing about hardware versus software is like a pendulum that just keeps swinging back and forth, and people want to make very strong determinations about where things are going based on one or the other. And here you guys are sometimes saying, oh, no, it's going to be the hardware. And then sometimes saying, oh, no, we're not messing around with the, we're going to do some crazy stuff with the software. It's so interesting to watch.
And I'd love to say we're unique, but we're not. If you think about the original Sony, PlayStation, Microsoft, Xbox battles, and then Nintendo comes out with,
the Switch,
those
the
cool
Wii
little
and the
devices, and the Switch, and instead of going for young guys wanting to do machine gun battles, thinking about, well, what about kids? What about parents? What about families? You can get caught up in the. There's a phrase, everyone thinks this, and the minute I hear everyone thinks, I know I'm in the wrong stream. I have to get into another room, because no one can say everyone thinks. It's I mean, and the classic example is smoking. Well, there's still a huge percentage of the population that smokes. Probably not that great for you, but it fills other needs, obviously. Everyone knows is a very dangerous and suppressive way of thinking, and we try not to work that way.
Incredible. John, this is already a blast. We have to take a quick break for an announcement, but when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about this swing between hardware and software. We'll be right back. Does your company belong at the center of the conversation about music tech innovation? Listen, you should consider sponsoring the Music Tectonics Conference. The top-tier sponsorships are selling fast, but we still have some slots for you, whether your business is a hungry startup or an industry leader already. Get sponsor benefits at our online events October 25th through October 27th, and in-person events outdoors by the sea in Los Angeles on November 2nd. It's going to be awesome. At every sponsorship level, you'll get a virtual exhibitor booth in the metaverse. If you've been disappointed by digital brand pages at other online events, you're going to love running a virtual booth at Music Tectonics. Trust me, we've tested it out. We've had events here, and it's a blast. We're offering the experience of a high-tech in-person expo booth at a fraction of the cost and none of the heavy lifting. Feature your videos, slide decks, graphics, and special offers so your company is top of mind with potential partners, investors, and clients. But best of all, you'll be able to draw a virtual crowd as attendees move through a three-dimensional virtual space. They can see where the action is, strike up conversations no matter where you are on the planet, and no VR headset is required. That's just one perk of being a sponsor at Music Tectonics. You could be a guest on this podcast, play a role in conference programming, and attend our VIP-only meetup in LA. Interested? Let's talk. Go to musictectonics.com/sponsors. That's musictectonics.com/sponsors to find out who's already signed on and start the conversation. All right, we're back. We started talking about this pendulum of how things are moving from hardware to software and back. How are things changing in the music world as more and more creativity seems to be taking place on computers and mobile devices? If you look all the way back to the history of Korg over the course of 50 plus years, without hardware instruments, I mean, is this where things are going to keep going? I know you just literally before our break said you never want to hear somebody say, everyone knows, but I'm curious, it does seem like a shift is happening. How do you perceive that shift?
Okay, I'm going to preface that with one of my favorite quotes of all time from John Lennon. Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. So if we'd had this discussion 16 months ago in a pre-COVID world, my answer would have been completely different. In a post-COVID world, I can say in the last 12 months has been record sales of guitars, acoustic, electric, woodwind instruments, pianos, acoustic pianos, digital pianos. Oh my God, digital pianos. These are hardware instruments. So the everyone is using suddenly has to take a step back because there is a huge section of the people who want to make music in a very instant, intuitive way. My fingers touch the instrument and I am making music. And of course, at the same time, you only have to speak to the hardware manufacturers of recording interfaces, and they'll tell you that the last year has been the greatest ever year for people building studios at home, and that audio interface sales have gone through the roof. And software companies have never sold as much software as they've sold. Which party's right? There is no one party that's right. There are just different ways of working depending upon what you want. If you're going to limit your thinking to, and I'm not saying you, Dimitri, if one is going to limit one's thinking to top 40, pop stars, popular music, then it really is about possibly recording on computer. But I mean, we do a lot of business in Asia, South America, the Middle East, Eastern Europe. And let me tell you, it's all about tactile and instant response. It doesn't mean there's no computer music. Clearly there is. There's a lot of electronic music production in every country of the world. But there is an instant thing. I mean, if you've ever been to a nightclub in Beirut, let me tell you, that's just one of the great hair-raising, extraordinary experiences of your life. And everything is instant. And that musician responds really fast. And we've designed the user interface on the keyboards that we sell in the Middle East to be no menu diving. It's right there and touching. And now I want this style. And now I need this pattern. And now I'm doing this. And those guys are, they've got one focus on the keyboard bed at the same time as they're running the interface, bringing up different sounds, different rhythms. And everyone's way of making music is valid. I mean, there's been a growth in people learning classical instruments. There are a number of people offering online lessons for guitar and piano. There are all sorts of people going back. I can tell you that in some countries, the biggest demographic of people buying one of our digital pianos are 60-year-old, 65-year-old women. And they're retired. And what are they going to do? I would like to do what I really enjoyed as a child, but I couldn't keep doing, and that's playing music. Is their music less valid than someone who's aiming for Billboard 100? No, not at all. And so you need to develop, not you, again, one needs to have a humble view of the world that we can't be prescriptive. We have to make the products. And then around the world, people will choose to use these products in all sorts of different ways. Roland didn't design the TB303 to be the essence of house in Chicago, and yet that's the way those people took it. And Mr. Katoh, again, Katoh-san, our founding chairman, used to say, sometimes we make products and we don't actually know how people are going to use them. And we're often surprised that people we thought were going in one direction have taken them in a completely different direction. Ours is not to direct. Ours is to give people the choice to express themselves in every way that they can.
Love it. I feel like there's for the traditional recorded music industry, which we focus on quite a bit on the podcast, I feel like there's a reconciliation coming between this concept of developing celebrities and stars versus this idea that the means of production are in the hands of the masses. And it's interesting that as you guys are a innovative company that's manufacturing the tools of creativity for sound and music, that you seem like you're much more closer to the people, to the streets of what the wide variety of individual users are using. Like every single potential user, regardless of whether they're going to be a star someday or even put out any kind of recording, is an input for how you think about what tools need to be made for making music, whereas the recorded industry is traditionally has been looking at how to amass a lot of followers for one song, one album, one artist, and so forth. It's so interesting to hear you talk about creativity. And in a way, when you're talking about, is it hardware versus software? It's both. What I almost hear you saying is for every new type of music making, every type of instrument, whether it's hardware or software, every individual model of product or so forth, you're actually unlocking the possibilities of one more or 10 more or 10,000 or 100,000 more people playing music, possibly for the first time.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I think Korg's not unique in this. I mean, I would say that a lot of modern music manufacturers are surprised by the breadth of their audience. You've touched on so many things there that I'd like to talk about. Record companies, I love the way you call them traditional. So, what motivates a record company? If it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. That's the way they've always thought, right? So, what are the biggest selling, let's just say, jazz albums of all time? The biggest selling jazz album of all time is probably Kind of Blue. 5 million copies over, I don't know, 50 something years. Time Out, Dave Brubeck's record, the Dave Brubeck Quartet, took 4 years to get to 500,000 copies. But what happened in the early 60s was a convergence of, youth, technology, TV, blah, blah, blah. Beatles being, the most cliched example where record companies went, oh my God, you can make that amount of money. And jazz and classical almost disappeared as record companies were saying, I want the next Beatles, I want the next Bowie, I want the next, and go through the 80s, 90s, and so on and so forth. And people will keep coming up with the next big thing. But it's such a exclusionary process because it's not accounting for all the people doing, Spanish classical guitar. Their records may only sell in the few thousands, but they're prized by musicians and music lovers around the world. And Argentinian tango and Kumba from Peru, and we can just go on and on. It's a huge mistake to think that everything is just about the next big thing. Now, regarding hardware and software, I think the next biggest challenge, or we think one of the next biggest challenges is if you're a young musician, let's just say back into the narrow world of the Billboard 100 or, whatever chart you want to use, but it's about appealing to as many people as possible, young people, and whichever variety of music it is that you want to talk about. So whatever that is, probably it's going to involve people recording at home on a computer, a DAW. They've got a recording set up. And the thing that we've noticed is so many people are wrestling with technology, learning how to name the software, name the computer, name the plugins, name the instruments. They're spending so much time learning technology. Where's the songwriting gone? Where's the instant brain to fingers gone? And look, do you think the Beatles ever worried about technology in 1962? That's what the guys behind the glass wall did. And I'm sorry, I'm not just talking about the Beatles. I'm talking about every act that worked in a studio where the engineers ran things. But in the last 20 years, as people have discovered recording at home, a lot of that immediate, intuitive way of working has disappeared because they're knee-deep in owner's manuals, software updates, driver clashes, and so on and so forth. So we often hear a lot of people say, workstations are dead. Why is Korg still making workstations? No one wants a workstation. And yet, it's a huge part of our business because people find that the keyboard's right in front of me, the menu's right in front of me, the buttons are right in front of me, I'm only a menu or two deep, and that's it. One of our most successful keyboards of the last, 30 years was a thing called the Stage Vintage, now into its second series. And the entire design paradigm was no menus, not a single menu, no push button. It's knobs, switches, controls, absolutely at your fingertips. They're not just bought by older people, they're bought by younger people who want to instantly performing. Especially a lot of singer players, they want to sing, they want to play. They don't want to be diving into menus because I have an idea and that idea has to get out. So technology liberates a lot of people, and it's great. I can make a wonderfully produced record at home, but for a lot of other people, technology is a barrier that prevents the creativity from expressing itself. And so, one of the attractions of an acoustic guitar or a very simple digital piano, or something like the Stage Vintage, is it's an immediate thing. I know what I'm playing. I'll work out the chords. I've got the melody in my head. I know the words, and it kind of there at the end of the day, I have a song. Not did I get the snare right? Oh, I might have to try this new reverb program. For God's sake, you can get so lost in technology. That doesn't mean that we don't do software. I mean, I think that we do, but we have to, you and I, the industry, we need to sustain the creative force. And the creative force expresses itself in a variety of different ways. Some people through technology, a huge number of people, I just got to sing. I've got to say something. I've got to get these words out. And I think that's fantastic. Sorry, that was a long answer. I didn't mean to drift.
No, this is perfect, John. I love what a big thinker you are. I feel like we've hit a little bit of a gold mine here with you being able to just ask a simple question and then really go into the depth of all the seismic shifts that are happening, but also stay rooted to the basics of human creativity and how people make music. So this is a blast. I am loving it. I want to ask you, I want to push it a little bit further here.
Right.
I mean, there's all this other stuff we haven't even gotten to that are influencing how we talk about where things are going with music, ranging from video gaming and how kind of the world of music and gaming is colliding, the world of creativity and gaming is colliding, the world of broadcast and gaming, virtual reality, how people are experiencing another, almost they call it a metaverse, right? A whole other plane of existence that's not right here in the physical sense, but in your mind and in your creative self very much exists, whether it's that experience of interacting with other people or actually creating music within VR. We've got everything that's been emerging with social video and social media, where people are interacting through this use of video, and it's having an impact on how people are discovering music, how people are creating short form music, 30-second snippets that end up in these viral videos. How are you thinking about all these other things that we haven't talked about that are kind of on the forefront of innovation and technology, and how that influences innovations that might be coming down the pike in the musical instrument world?
Boy, again, I'm sorry, but it's your fault. You just covered 5 huge topics there in one thing, and I'll try and I realize I'm probably talking a lot.
You're doing great. We're loving this.
Minimize my answers, but the first thing that we do is try and separate between the entertainment end and the creative end. So a lot of what you're talking about has got to do with the way the audience or the customer or the listener or even the musician receives and embraces and indulges. And with all due respect, that's another podcast. And you and I can pull out a bottle of red wine and I can talk to you for hours about what it's like on the receiving end, but we really want to stay as close as we can to the people who are doing the creating. And that sounds really arrogant. It's not meant to be. It's just to say it's too easy to get distracted by saying, oh, look at this thing you can do with gaming and with blah, blah, blah. Okay, I think you're talking about experiencing, and that's a great thing to experience. Let's talk about how people are going to develop content for that, or going to create for that, or how it's going to influence the way they express themselves for that. These things are kind of where we're at, So, of course, I mean, between TikTok and Instagram and many other formats, people have found all different ways of expressing themselves. Although, pardon the cynic in me, Google's making $2 to $3 billion a week, and yet on YouTube you get 1 million views, you get $1,000. Spotify, which has 35% of the streaming market, what do they pay roughly? $4,000 per million views. It's great getting the views, but we would say, let's figure out how you can make your stuff as representative as you, as rich as possible, the best possible sound, to give you the best opportunity so that when you go out onto one of the streaming platforms, you stand out. So it's no secret that a lot of companies, including ours, have technology that allows a complete beginner, completely untrained musician to walk up and within seconds be making music, I mean, in the old days of guitar, the first E chord and then an A and then a B, and suddenly you've got your, God help us all.
You've got 1,000 songs.
Yeah. Well, a million, 12-bar songs. But I mean, the point is that you only needed those early chords, and the idea that you were pissing off your parents, and you're on the way, right? So, with one of probably the biggest selling hardware synth of all time is the Korg Microkorg, 4-voice polyphonic, modeling analog. It's been on sale for 18 years. It still sells literally thousands every year. And I first understood the power of this keyboard when I took a prototype home, and my kids at that stage were 4 and 3, and one was 5 or 6. Anyway, they started playing it, and at this stage they couldn't play, and they were, hitting it with their fists, and they had the arpeggiator on, and they realized it sounded musical. It didn't matter what they did. It didn't sound bad. And in fact, that's probably one of the reasons it's been so successful. But suddenly they worked out the tempo for the arpeggiator. They changed the notes, they changed the programs, and then of course they've discovered the filter and the resonance, and that was it. They're off. These are kids. These are barely out of into elementary school. And so there's many companies that have, software. Put your mouse here and suddenly there's a song. I mean, it's possible to do. The Gutenberg press didn't exactly make everyone a Shakespeare. There's still only one Shakespeare. There's still only one Jane Austen, Henry James, Joseph Heller, one of my favorite American authors, Tony Collins. Anyway, I'm digressing. So the point is, just having the printing press doesn't produce works of art. You still have the few people who can produce and touch people, whether locally or nationally or perhaps internationally. So our wrestling match, to circle back to the beginning, is to come up with technology that allows people to tap into the people who just want the one finger entertainment experience, and they're making music and they sound great and they feel good. They don't want to be in a concert hall. They're not trying to express themselves. They're quite happy to just play the theme from Titanic or, Dr. Zhivago or some other thing they grew up with. This is we think this is fantastic. But we also understand there are people who from the ground up want to get their own rhythms and the background and the voice in the orchestration, because they've got the song in their head and they want it to sound magnificent the way it comes out. And as I said, there are people who just want a piano with no distractions. They just want to have a set of headphones because they're in a small apartment. They know the song they want to write. They just need to work it out either musically or vocally or whatever. So our challenge is to steer away from all the not distractions. They're so enticing. It's like a dog chasing butterflies in a park. You're just like, oh my God, there's that butterfly. Look, with the PlayStation, you can now this, and I throw on a set of goggles and I can fight yeah, you can. That's the experience. For the content developers, the creators, we want our tools to give them the quickest path to professional fulfillment, whether that be the one finger player, the one chord player, or the really sophisticated high-level Hollywood studio musician.
Great. Yeah. All right. Look, we got to take another quick break.
Sorry.
And this has been great. I'm having a blast. I love where we're going with this. But John, when we come back, I'd love to ask you a little bit about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. We kicked off the conversation talking about you being grounded, but I'm curious the larger impact on Korg users and the company and so forth. We'll be right back. Whoa, the ideas are flying fast on this episode. If you want to follow up on anything we're talking about today, we've made it easy. Head over to musictectonics.com and find this episode on the podcast page. You'll see show notes full of links and a time-stamped roadmap of the conversation. We're not responsible for internet rabbit holes you tumble down in the process. Now, let's get back to the conversation. Okay, this has been so fun. We're back. John, I was curious to ask you, we've talked a little bit about the COVID-19 pandemic, but what are you seeing shifting for Korg? It could be among your users or as a company as a whole. What has changed since the pandemic?
The pandemic has actually had a seismic shift in the music business. When I speak to some of the biggest music stores in the world, they say that an analysis of their file shows that 70% of the purchases in 2020 were to people they'd never sold to before,
Oh,
first
wow.
time musicians. This is, I mean, there are companies that were, I don't want to name them, but dangerously close to going under that are suddenly, riding high simply because so many people wanted their first guitar, or I'm stuck at home. My kids have left home, but I now have the money. I've always wanted to buy this custom workshop guitar, or this top of the range Korg workstation, or something like that. So there's been a huge explosion in pianos, acoustic and electric guitar packages, people making music at home for the first time. But this is good because once uh, COVID begins to recede, and I'll talk about that in a minute, many of those people will go back to playing sports or traveling internationally or doing whatever they're doing. A lot of people are going to say, I love this. This is just great fun. I want to now get a better guitar. I now want to get a better keyboard. I now want to build my home studio and so on and so forth. So we think there's going to be a new generation of musicians doing things that I can't even begin to predict at the moment, that it's going to be coming in the next couple of years. It's no secret that worldwide, of course, touring stopped, live performance stopped in most markets, not all, but most markets, most places around the world, and everyone thinking, what's going to happen after that? Well, in Australia, we've got almost no infections to speak of. I think the last death through COVID was months ago.
Wow.
Vaccination rates high, and this is about science. I'm not trying to choose any color of politics. That's got nothing to do with me. I'm just pointing out that we now have sports events with 80,000 people attending, pubs are full, bars are full, and young people are so desperate to get away from their parents that they're flocking to every goddamn club and venue that they possibly can. It's actually been extraordinary. And we own the brand Vox, one of the legendary amplifier brands in the music business, and an amp called the AC30, the Beatles amp, and Queen and U2 and many others. But it's a phenomenally loud amp. And so for a few months last year, the AC30 sales worldwide pretty much, slowed down dramatically. But in market after market where COVID's been successfully beaten back, Australia and New Zealand are the two obvious examples. AC30 sales have exploded because people are like, dude, I'm going to be performing. And I speak to musicians that I know in my own hometown. I mean, guys, I used to be a professional musician. I know a lot of people, and they've been saying, I am booked solid. It's unbelievable.
Wow.
And local governments are putting on, sponsoring buskers instead of shooing them away. They're sponsoring them outside every supermarket. We're just trying to get people out again and mixing with people. So it's a stellar time for performing musicians to finally be able to perform again. And it's just, if you think about it, it's natural. Young people want to meet young people. This is the mating game. It's only, millions of years old. So we, really, and it's funny, around the US, we can see as states open up and cities open up, places are packed. I was speaking to a friend in New York just this morning who said, my God, you walk down the street and there are people out again. And it's like, why? But why would you stay home? The weather's improving. There's a chance of meeting someone new. There's a chance of getting away from your family. God love them, but I've got to get away. Even brothers and sisters going their separate ways. We can finally get out. So we think there's going to be a lot more live entertainment, and we can already see it. We have a brand called Sakai, which make really high-end premium drum kits. Couldn't give them away last year. Suddenly, we've got people saying, "Oh, I've got a customer for that because they've got a series of concerts lined up and blah blah blah." So we see that but during the COVID, it was a difficult time for everyone. But as the vaccinations take hold, as more people become vaccinated, because the vaccination doesn't protect you, of course, it stops you latently infecting other people. So the point is that you lower the overall infection rate by being vaccinated yourself. That's the reason it's so important. And I am vaccinated. But the more people are out and about and getting back to normal, we feel live music is booming again. And I can see it in jazz clubs, classical music ensembles. I mean, there was a cafe that has a string quartet packed. Classical music fans, at last, I can see classical music live. I mean, this is not in your top 40 Billboard way of looking at the world, but these people are out there, you know?
Incredible. I mean, we recently had a guy named Ed Vincent from a company called Festival Pass on the podcast, and he referred to the Roaring '20s as coming. It sounds like you also think that we're going to see the pendulum of interest and growth in the music space just explode post-pandemic, which is exciting to hear about. This has been such a blast. I've enjoyed this so much. I just want to ask you one more question before we wrap it up, John. As you look out at the broader culture, society, music industry, are there other future trends or innovations that you're keeping an eye on?
Well, there's always the unintended knock-on effect. We had plans for product development this year that have been delayed, and I can tell you it's the same at a lot of other manufacturers because we can't get components. Why can't we? Now, this blows my mind. What do you mean we can't get CPUs? USB interfaces, A to D converters. Try and buy a graphics card in most of the civilized world. It's impossible. Do you know where they're going? All the people mining Bitcoin.
Oh, wow.
Now Bitcoin energy use is equivalent to the entire power output of Argentina and Denmark combined. Not quite the enviro-friendly thing that people say it is. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is because we felt there were some things which I'm sorry I can't tell you what we've got planned in the next couple of years specifically, but we felt and I've given hints while I've been talking about the way people approach products, intuitive music making, improving the sound performance, just different things. And we're hampered because we just can't plan production. And we're not the only one. There's many companies that just can't plan production because they can't get the components because they're being snaffled up by other people. I think that everyone who says they're an expert, you really got to wonder. I mean, you only have to look at how much AT&T is just about to drop selling the Time Warner or the Warner Media division to Discovery or whoever buys it. And the AOL acquisition, which was another $200 billion lost. Some of the brightest business minds making catastrophic mistakes. But what we do know is that the days of single record companies making single stars, that's disappearing, and it's all about dispersion. Everything is being dispersed. And so when people realize they can't make money out of YouTube, Google makes money, you don't, or even Spotify, there are going to be other ways that people combine to make music the way it was actually before the Beatles. Lots of local performances, merchandise, interaction with fans, and it's something that I think you and I had been talking about prior to this conversation. The way fans interact with artists and the way artists perform for fans is very different. It's no longer 80,000. Well, I mean, there's still going to be mega concerts, but for the average musician, the dream of a mega concert is not what matters. What matters is local performance and spreading their name, their brand, their music in a very small way, very wide. And it's going to be done through streaming, but it's going to be done through other ways as well. And so what we want to do is in summary, is speed up the process whereby people can become better performers, better creators, so that they can get out to that audience as quickly as possible. That would be the summary of where we are.
Incredible. John McCubbery, VP of International Sales and Marketing at Korg. This has been an absolute blast. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We're going to have you back. I think we found our beacon in Australia for musical creativity, instruments, and beyond. This has been a blast. Thanks so much.
Thank you. very much for your time.
Thanks for listening to Music Tectonics. If you like what you hear, please hit subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We put out new episodes every week. Want more? Find it at musictectonics.com. You can dig deeper into this episode, learn about our annual conference, get the Music Tectonics app, and sign up for our newsletter. Musictectonics.com has it all. Also, look for Music Tectonics on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Clubhouse. And connect with me, Dmitry Vitsa, on LinkedIn. Peace.
You're listening to Music Tectonics.